Ever heard someone mention the dark web? Kind of sends chills down your spine, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's got that kind of mysterious, almost mythical reputation.
Like a digital boogeyman hiding in the shadows of the internet. Everyone's heard whispers, but few really know what's actually there.
Right, a lot of scary stories and misconceptions floating around.
So today we're turning on the lights and taking a deep dive into the dark web. We've got a ton of your questions and some seriously interesting research articles to unpack, and luckily we've got an expert here to help us separate facts from fiction.
I'm happy to shed some light on things. It's definitely true that the dark web has a bit of a PR problem, often gets painted as this exclusively dangerous and illegal space.
Yeah, like it's just a den of cybercriminals and nothing else.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling it's a bit more complicated than that, right?
Exactly. It's not so black and white. Think of the internet like like a giant iceberg, maybe.
Okay, I like this analogy. I'm picturing it.
The tip of the iceberg, the part everyone sees, that's your surface web. Your Google searches, your favorite news sites, online shopping, all that jazz.
Makes sense so far.
Now, dip below the surface, and you've got the deep web. This is where things get a little more, well, deep. It's still part of the internet, but it's not indexed by those regular search engines.
So it's like the stuff that's hidden from plain sight.
You got it. Think password-protected content, cloud storage, even your online banking information, all that good stuff.
Okay, so that makes sense. But where does the dark web fit into all of this?
That's the very bottom of our iceberg, the part that's shrouded in darkness and mystery. It exists on a completely separate network, and you need special software to access it. The most well-known is the Tor browser.
Ah, the Tor browser. I've definitely heard of that. Mostly in hushed, slightly nervous tones, I have to admit. So you need this special tool to even get a peek into this hidden world.
Yeah, and because of that restricted access, it offers a level of anonymity that's very appealing to certain individuals and groups, both good and bad, I might add.
And I'm guessing that's where things start to get a little shady. Like that anonymity can be used for both noble and nefarious purposes.
Exactly. On one hand, you have those unsettling headlines about illicit marketplaces, data breaches, all sorts of cybercrime. And our research definitely highlighted the very real dangers that exist in those corners of the dark web.
Right, it's important to acknowledge that side of things.
Absolutely. But then there's the flip side. One of the articles you shared talked about how the dark web can be a lifeline for whistleblowers and journalists, especially in countries with strict censorship.
That's a really interesting point. So it's a tool that can be used to fight injustice and promote transparency too.
Exactly. It allows them to share sensitive information anonymously, protecting themselves and their sources. So it's not as simple as saying the dark web is all good or all bad. It's a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for a variety of purposes.
It's like that old saying, guns don't kill people, people kill people. But instead of guns, it's the dark web, right? It all comes down to who's using it and for what purpose.
Right. Technology itself is often morally neutral. It's the human element, the intent behind the use, that determines if it becomes a force for good or bad.
That makes a lot of sense. It reminds me of how people used to talk about the early internet. There was so much fear and uncertainty about what this new technology meant, what it would be used for.
Right, and look at us now, completely dependent on it.
Totally. But even with all this talk about the potential for harm, I think a lot of our listeners might be wondering about the practical risks. Like, even if you never plan on downloading that Tor browser, are there still things to be wary of when it comes to online safety in general?
Absolutely. Being aware of the risks associated with the dark web can actually make you a more informed and cautious internet user overall.
It's wild to think about, like all this talk about anonymity and privacy on the dark web. It really makes you realize how much people value control over their online lives, even if it means venturing into some pretty murky territory.
Definitely. It's a fascinating paradox.
And speaking of online lives, let's shift gears from the shadows of the dark web to something that's probably lighting up everyone's phones right now as we speak, social media.
Always a hot topic, right?
You got that right. And we got a bunch of your questions and articles about the future of social media, so I'm ready to dive in if you are.
Let's do it. It's a constantly evolving landscape, but there are definitely some clues about where things might be headed.
Hit me with your predictions.
Well, get ready for a wild ride because one of the biggest changes on the horizon is the rise of augmented and virtual reality experiences.
AR/VR. Right. I've definitely been hearing more and more about that lately.
It's not just hype, it's going to completely transform how we interact with social media.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Paint me a picture. What are we talking about here?
Imagine, instead of just scrolling through vacation photos, you're right there with your friend, virtually strolling down the beach, feeling the sand beneath your feet.
Whoa. Okay, that's next level.
It's like teleportation to a perfectly curated reality.
Seriously, though, for those of us who aren't, jet-setting influencers, what does AR/VR actually mean for the average person on social media?
It's going to be huge. For one, think about attending a virtual concert or a fashion show from your living room, interacting with friends and other fans in real time.
Oh, wow, I can see that taking off.
And for businesses, the marketing potential is insane. Imagine trying on clothes virtually or taking a 3D tour of a hotel room before you book.
So it's not just about entertainment, it's really blurring the lines between the digital world and our physical realities.
Exactly, and that's where things get really interesting. How will this impact our relationships, our sense of place, even our perception of what's real and what's not?
Big questions. And to be honest, a little unnerving.
Definitely something to keep in mind. And while we're on the topic of blurred lines, one of your articles brought up the social commerce boom.
Oh, yeah, shopping through social media, that's already a thing, isn't it?
It is, but it's about to explode. Soon buying something directly through your favorite platform will be as normal as liking a post.
That makes me think of our conversation about the dark web. Both seem to point to this desire for seamlessness and instant gratification online. Like, we want everything at our fingertips.
Absolutely, but with all this integration and data sharing, it's more crucial than ever to consider the potential downsides.
Right, we touched on data privacy earlier, but what else should we be aware of? What are we risking in this pursuit of convenience and connection?
You're right to be cautious. One article highlighted something crucial. As our lives become more entwined with these platforms, issues of data privacy and security become paramount.
It's easy to forget that everything we do online leaves a trail.
It does. And imagine a world where your every comment, even your virtual experiences are all being tracked, analyzed, potentially even exploited.
Okay, now that is a little scary.
It's not as far-fetched as we might think, and it's a good reminder to be mindful of our digital footprints.
So how do we navigate this new terrain responsibly, especially as those lines between our online and offline lives become increasingly blurred?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's going to take a joint effort. Individuals, tech companies, policymakers, we all have a role to play in finding that balance between innovation and ethical considerations.
No easy answers there, that's for sure.
Not at all. But on a personal level, I think it starts with awareness, understanding how these platforms work, how your data is being used, and being more conscious of the information you're sharing.
Being informed and empowered, just like we talked about with the dark web, it's about taking control of your own online experience.
Exactly. And one more thing, one of the articles you sent stressed the importance of adaptability in this ever-changing digital world.
Makes sense. Things move so fast online, you gotta be ready to adapt.
And be open to exploring new platforms because those are popping up all the time.
True. I mean, remember MySpace?
Yeah.
Who knows what the next big thing will be?
Exactly. Sometimes you got to let go of the familiar to embrace the new.
And speaking of embracing the new, wow, we've covered a lot of ground today. From the hidden corners of the dark web to the social media trends that could reshape our digital lives. It's a lot to take in.
It really is, and it's fascinating to me how these two topics, the dark web and the future of social media, might seem totally different on the surface.
Right, at first glance, they seem worlds apart.
But when you really dig in, they both come down to these fundamental human needs and desires. The need for privacy, the desire for connection, that constant search for control in a world that often feels anything but.
Yeah, it's like we're always trying to find that sweet spot between anonymity and connection, between security and freedom, and the digital world keeps throwing us curveballs.
Absolutely. And as we venture further into this uncharted territory, it's more important than ever to be mindful, not just of the amazing opportunities that technology offers.
Right. There's a lot of potential for good.
Definitely. But we also have to be aware of the potential consequences, what we do online, the choices we make, the information we share. It all leaves a mark.
It's a lot of responsibility, and honestly, it can feel a bit overwhelming sometimes, like trying to learn a new language when everyone else is already fluent.
It's true, the learning curve can be steep. But that's where I think a healthy dose of skepticism comes in handy. Don't be afraid to question what you see online, to dig a little deeper, to double-check information before you take it as gospel.
So fact check everything, basically.
Exactly. Critical thinking is still your best defense against misinformation and manipulation, whether you're browsing the dark web or scrolling through your favorite social media feed.
Good advice. It all comes back to being informed and empowered, and maybe a little bit skeptical too. As we wrap things up, I want to leave you with something to think about. As our digital and physical lives continue to blend together, Will we rise to the occasion and become more savvy navigators of this complex online world? Or will there come a point where we long for simpler times? Until next time, keep exploring, stay curious, and remember, the most important connection you have in the digital age is the one you have with your own intuition.